Welcome to our webinar, Using Circles to Navigate Difficult Discussions. On behalf of my co-presenter and colleague, Mike Volanino, we'd like to welcome you to this presentation. We're glad you stopped by. My name is Denise Morris, and I'm the Assistant Director of Outreach at the Roach Center for Catholic Education at Boston College. My experience includes 14 years of teaching in urban, public, and Catholic elementary schools in the Midwest. And given, or depending on where I taught, 75 to 95% of my students were first and second generation immigrants and refugees. So in a sense, this became my vocation within a vocation. And I decided to come to Boston College 2.5 years ago and to pursue a degree in theology and pastoral ministry so that I could explore the intersection of faith and justice and education. So I continue to do that work here at the Roach Center. So I'm very grateful for the work and the position here. In my spare time, I enjoy hiking and running and biking and pretty much just being outside. This time I'll let Mike introduce himself before we start our presentation.
How are you all doing today? Thank you for joining us for this webinar. My name is Mike Volanino. I'm in my 7th year as the principal of Archbishop Williams High School in Braintree, Massachusetts, which is just south of Boston, but it is on the Red Line. So we're close. Archbishop Williams is a grade 7 to 12 school. We're coeducational, and we were founded by the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth, which is part of our proud tradition. I'm in my 9th year as a Catholic school administrator, having been in Austin, Texas before this. And while I was in Austin, I was also pursuing a PhD, exploring teacher quality and using strategic compensation and looking at intrinsic motivational factors to drive school improvement. In my spare time, in similar vein to Denise, I enjoy running, being outdoors, hockey, and English soccer. I am a huge Chelsea fan. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Mike. So goals of this session. After this session, you will be able to describe the origin and uses of circles. You will be able to connect the practice of circles to Catholic social teaching. You will understand the application of circles in Catholic schools. And then finally, you will be able to implement circles to navigate difficult discussions in your own classrooms. So we'll start with what is the circle, and most of the content from our presentation today comes from the book Circle Forward, Building a Restorative School Community by Carolyn Boyes Watson and Kay Pranas. So this definition also comes from that book. So it says the circle is a carefully constructed, intentional dialogue space. The circle welcomes difficult emotions and difficult realities while maintaining a sense of positive possibilities. And there's 3 phrases here that I think are really important to note. The first being it's carefully constructed. So circles are not just thrown together at the last minute or a fun way to teach, but they are very intentional. There's a lot of thought that goes into the questions that are asked and into the actual process. The second phrase is that it is welcoming. It welcomes difficult emotions and realities. This is important because it means that we are inviting others and all of who others are into the circle. And while this can feel very vulnerable, circles help us to become more comfortable with hearing other stories and be able to hold those stories with and for them. And finally, circles maintain a sense of positive possibilities. Circles, ultimately, they're meant to foster restoration and reconciliation and healing. So they provide a way forward where there may not have been one before. A little bit about the history of circles. They originated with the First Nations leaders. They were used as a way to ensure that all leaders in the council were heard and that those speaking were not interrupted. For Indigenous people, circles are not merely a technique, they're actually a way of life. They are how Indigenous peoples foster this sense of belonging and participation. And I think it's really fascinating to point out that stones and wooden stumps in the configuration of circles have actually been found across Europe. Which reveals the reality that circles have been practiced by Indigenous peoples for many millennia. If we move on to the current times, in the 1990s, the 2000s, the members of the First Nations actually began teaching the circle practice to non-Native people, which at that time they were lawyers and prosecutors and judges. The Indigenous peoples were seeking alternatives to the mass incarceration that their people had suffered, and circles were a way for them to do that while still remaining very true to their tradition. when the non-native people began to experience that healing and transformation and the powerful consequences of that, the practice of circles began to expand into the criminal and juvenile justice systems as a way to provide spaces of encounter and truth-telling between victims and their offenders. For example, victims get the chance to describe how they feel, offenders have the opportunity to explain why they committed the crime, and then the community members get a chance to explain how they feel that crime has impacted their community. Recently, circles have made their way into schools as ways to build relationships, address conflict, as alternative approaches to discipline, as a way to create safe spaces, and also as a method of learning. So why circles? What is being practiced in a circle? And again, these come from the book Circle Forward that we mentioned earlier. First of all, I think it's pretty easy to see that they foster a sense of respect. If done well, they create a really safe space for each person to bring all of who they are, like we mentioned earlier. It's a sacred space. It's that sacred space where each person has an opportunity to speak and to be heard. They foster a sense of equality as well. As you can see from the picture here, like the physical shape of a circle naturally facilitates equality because there are no positions of authority. There's a flattening of the power hierarchy, and no one person has more rights or power than anyone else. There is a practice of empathy in circles. If you can imagine yourself just sitting in a physical circle, which I know is difficult during this time of Zoom, but in the physical circle, just the reality of facing someone and looking them in the eye is an act of empathy and compassion. Also, problem solving. The circle practice carries the assumption that every participant has something of value to offer and their voice is necessary to resolve conflict. Also, circles facilitate responsibility and accountability with our words and our actions. Again, if you're sitting in a circle looking at somebody and speaking, it helps us understand that our words do in fact carry weight and they do in fact have consequences. There also is a sense of self-regulation and self-awareness. We learn turn taking, we learn patience, and we learn the ability to listen while delaying our own need to speak immediately. And finally, in circles, there's shared leadership. Because there is no authority figure in a circle, every member is considered a leader. So the circle then, it holds space for multiple perspectives. It recognizes the existence of multiple experiences, and there is a genuine feeling of connection and belonging. So when you keep in mind what is being practiced in circles, I think it's pretty easy to see how circles align with our themes of Catholic social teaching. When you think about the life and dignity of the human person, circles invite and value the contribution and experiences of every participant. Additionally, as we said earlier, the goals of circles are the wholeness and the flourishing of each member of our community, and this is the foundation of Catholic social teaching. When you think about the option for the poor and the vulnerable, circles provide persons whose voices tend to be marginalized the opportunity to participate and contribute. When I think about students in our classroom and how many of them can be marginalized, circles are a process that can facilitate their belonging. For many reasons, students may have a quieter or more introverted personality. They may be less comfortable sharing. Maybe it's because of their relationships with peers. These are reasons that students can feel marginalized as well. Perhaps they are marginalized because of their gender, their race, their ethnicity, or their culture, or even because of teachers' prejudices or biases. So circles champion the equality, and they provide the marginalized students in our classrooms the opportunity to contribute. By their very nature, I think it's also easy to see how circles facilitate the call to family, to community, and participation, because they seek the contribution of every participant. When you think about rights and responsibilities, circles remind us that we all have a right to participate, but that we also have a responsibility to listen to others because they have something valuable to contribute and something that is needed. When you consider solidarity, we know that solidarity seeks a good outcome for all. Solidarity is animated by the belief that we are all in this together. It says your experiences is just as important as mine. And I think you can very easily see how circles facilitate this belief. And finally, So this next theme is not actually included on this slide, but I think it's really important to point out that circles make possible subsidiarity. Um, Subsidiarity is a theme of Catholic social teaching, and it's the principle that tells us that higher orders should not interfere with what the lower orders can achieve. This is really applicable to circles because if there's a conflict to be resolved or a relationship that needs to be restored in schools, subsidiarity means that the issue doesn't have to be taken directly or immediately to the principal or to administration, but can actually be solved at the local classroom level. Circles provide a built-in form of subsidiarity, and they allow for problems or issues to resolve themselves as closely to the ground or the occurrence as possible. So before we get into a recording that we conducted to do an example of a circle for you, just real quickly, I want to run through the components. I won't go into depth. If you want more explanation, again, feel free to read the book Circle Forward, which is cited at the end. Circles usually have a centerpiece, as you can see in the picture here. It creates a focal point that supports the speaking and listening, and they can be items that represent the values of the students. And they could also represent a shared vision that the group has for the circle process. Circles have agreements and norms, and it's really important that these are done with the actual participants of the circle, much like I'm sure your own classroom rules are done at the beginning of the year with your students. It's really important to have those to guide. There's an opening and a closing of circles. This is critical because this kind of sets the circle apart from the other learning and the activities that are taking place during your day. It helps to mark the circle as a sacred space, and your opening can be a poem, it can be a prayer, it can be a reading that your class finds interesting or very powerful. It's just a way to set the circle apart. Following the opening, you might want to do a mindfulness moment, which is breathing or stillness, a way to help center the students and to bring them mind, body, soul, spirit, and heart into the present moment of being in the circle. There's also a circle keeper. Now, it's important to note that this is not a facilitator, but this is someone who they guide the rounds, but they also are a participant in the circle. There's a talking piece, which is very helpful when you're actually in in-person circles. It's a physical indicator of whose turn it is to talk, and only the person holding the talking piece may speak, which allows them to speak without being interrupted. Even if a student needs to pass, just holding the talking piece makes them feel like still a participant in the circle. Also, a speaking order is critical. This keeps the loudest and the extroverted students from controlling the conversation. In circles, there's no crosstalk. They're not about persuasion. They're not about fixing people. They're not about arguing. Circles are meant as a process to explore meaning for each participant. So there's no reason for anyone to respond to anyone else's contributions or point of view. And finally, circles consist of a series of rounds. This can be anywhere from 3 to 5 rounds, depending on the topic to be addressed or the goal that you want to achieve with your circle. At this point, we're going to model a circle that features high school teachers and administrators processing their experience of teaching during COVID. And I think you'll find this very powerful. If after watching this video or this model, you feel like a circle is something that you are interested in or want to do with your faculty and staff, both Mike or I would be happy to connect with you and support you in this process. And our emails are at the end of this presentation. This circle originally consisted of 5 rounds, which you can see from the slide, and then this includes the questions we asked. However, due to time constraints, you are only going to see rounds 1, 2, and 5. And if you would like to watch the whole video, there's a link in the session description, or you can contact Mike or I directly. And then if you're watching this video with your staff, there is a slide following the circle that provides you with questions to reflect on and the opportunity to debrief and discuss what you observed.
So before we begin the program, I'm just going to invite them to introduce themselves. So, but Judy, if you could quickly introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Judy McMullen, and I'm the chair of the theology department at Archbishop Williams. I teach 9th grade and 12th grade theology.
Jonathan?
Hi, my name is Jonathan Babcock. I'm part of the social studies department here at Archie's, and I teach juniors and seniors.
Mary Kate?
Hi, I'm Mary Kate Servin. I'm the Assistant Director of Campus Ministry, and I also teach 11th grade theology.
And Jackie?
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Lacavara. I'm in the theology department here, and I teach 9th and 10th grade theology.
Again, thank you all for being with us and giving of your time. So at this point, and what you want to do in the circle is create a sacred space. Take a moment. So I'm going to invite everybody now, from you watching at home and here, just take a minute and put yourself in the Lord's presence. Remind yourself that whether in person or virtually, where 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, there the Lord is in our midst. And as we begin, if we could ask for the intercession of the Blessed Mother to guide us with our discussion today and be with us. And if we can just sit with a Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. All right. So, first round in our sort of circle as we come now in the presence of God. How are you arriving in circle today? So we have an order. It's off. Our order is off screen, but we do have a circle. So if I could invite MK, if you could just sort of the first prompt, first round. How are you arriving in circle today?
I am arriving very grateful for the sun this week and for some warmer weather.
Denise, how are you today arriving in circle?
I also am very grateful for the sun. I woke up today hearing the birds singing, and I haven't heard that in a long time. And even though there's snow on the ground and it is cold, I just think that I know that I come with a happy heart, still with a little heaviness because of everything that's going on, but I do have a happy heart today.
Jackie?
I am arriving in the circle today happy and optimistic.
I'm arriving very grateful. With this is a Friday when we're recording this, and at the end of every week, I have a particular amount of gratitude in this time that we've gotten through another week of instruction with our kids and been able to sort of move forward as a school community. So very grateful. Judy?
I'm coming a little preoccupied. Feel like I'm juggling a lot of things, but looking forward to the weekend. What will hopefully be a productive weekend, and hopeful.
Jonathan?
I'm arriving just having finished a virtual day with our students. For some of the classes, that means a full class. For others, it means just check-ins. And then I took a break to walk the dog outside in the woods. And I'm not sure if I'd say spring is here yet, but all the snow melting sort of makes it seem like it's at least a possibility. So nice recharge of my batteries.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to our second round. What is one concern you have about your students regarding COVID learning? Denise, begin.
As I think about this question, my attention actually has been more shifted toward the teachers. I recently heard a presentation given by a principal on SEL, social emotional learning, and she just acknowledged that after everything they had done to ensure that the kids' emotional and social health was taken care of, they realized that it was the teachers who were really struggling, because a lot of the teachers were dealing with, they were doing double and triple duty, not only educating, but at home they were doing homeschooling, they were doing caretaking. And so I know the question is around the students, but I also think that it concerns the students, is that you know, I've talked to several friends lately who are teaching, and they're just feeling really the drain of the task before them. I feel like people have kind of steeled themselves to make it through Christmas. And as we arrive on this year anniversary of COVID, I just sense a lot of like heaviness. And so I guess my concern is around the adults and the teachers, and kind of what I'm sensing and feeling and seeing from the teachers right now, so that what do they need so that they can adequately care for and nurture the students.
Jackie.
Thank you, Denise, for that reflection. I am concerned about meeting each of my students where they need me to be, particularly since we have in-person and online instruction, I worry about my students who are on Zoom and have been on Zoom for this entire time. Not only their social and emotional health, having had to Zoom in and be on the computer all day, but also academically, I worry about is my instruction helpful to them? Are they able to hear me and their peers well enough? I worry if they feel a part of our classroom community.
Thank you, Jackie. For me, the concern I have for right now that I'm taking with this is the students that have chosen to be remote for the year. I had a meeting this afternoon with student representatives of people that had concerns over just what the experience is like as a fully remote learner, and a little sense of isolation, of just kind of how the days just all seem to be the same, and that's just compounding the general anxiety that we're all facing at this time. So that being mindful of the fact that how do we reach out? How are we engaging? How are we being attentive to all of our students and all of their social emotional needs? And it's a difficult thing. At the end of a conversation that we had today, we asked the student, could you, let's come back and talk in a week. What can you bring to us? Because we don't have collectively as a team any answers to this either, but trying to be mindful and solve together this problem is something that has been weighing on me. Judy?
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what almost everyone is saying. I do not worry about the content and whether I'm going to get to chapter 10. I'm concerned about my students' emotional health, their emotional development, their mental health. With my freshmen, I noticed that these key connections that are usually made this year, because we have students that are coming from different schools and they're building this new community. They're not all moving from 8th grade up. So I'm feeling that these key connections that usually develop during this time are not being made. I was hopeful a few months ago they were, and yet I recognize with some of my shyer students, if you will, that they continue to be isolated even though they're in the classroom. So I worry about that, and I worry about my seniors who these connections that they had, especially with those who are remote, they're beginning to lose that connection, those important connections, before that space is being filled up, as it hopefully will be when they go to college. So I guess I'm worried about, their mental health, their emotional health, and what that means in terms of their ability to challenge themselves and feel like there's a safe place where they're going to land, that community of friends, their willingness to take chances, but those things are all being impacted.
Thank you, Judy. Jonathan?
My big concern, which I've really just sort of come to be aware of since we got back from Christmas, is also the kids who are Zooming full time. I'm really starting to see the kids loosen up in all of my classes, the ones who are in class at least. That usually happens a few months earlier, but I think this year it's because of the masks and the distancing. It just took a little longer. They're starting to feel comfortable, with me, with each other in class. And that's really sort of made it stand out that the Zoom kids are not part of that. And I'm finding it difficult to bring them into that. It's just the technological barriers make that hard. And I'm really starting, even the ones who are doing quite well in their class according to the grades, they're not part of the jokes or the fun activities or the group activities in the same way when they're at home behind a computer, and I'm worried about them for that.
MK.
I think my biggest concern is the relationships, definitely, that they're fostering between themselves and with their teachers. I think they're definitely, even for my students in person, it is not the same experience they've had in years past. I find that my relationship with my students this year is drastically different than last year because of the restrictions that we're under with COVID. I'm also very concerned about our international students. We have many students who are overseas and who are zooming into my class at 1 a.m. their time, and I am very concerned about their social emotional health and how they're doing and how they're balancing their family during the day and then having to be on school so late at night.
So fill in the blank as a kind of a final way to bring our discussion, this reflection to kind of a conclusion. Sort of, I wish that I could blank. And Judy, when you're ready, I wish that I could blank.
This took me no time at all when I thought about it. I wish that I could jump 20 years in the future, talk to my students, my son, my family, and say what worked, what helped, what really, and then come back and do it. Yeah, that's what I wish.
Jonathan.
I have a couple classes of seniors, and there's a handful of kids in each class who haven't stepped foot on campus, since last year, who I've never met with in person. And I really wish I could just, before they graduate and move on and leave us in the rearview mirror, wish I could just spend a class or two just talking to them and talking about what they're thinking about for college, and what they thought of this year, just getting to know them a little bit, even with just, a few minutes every week to check in with them. You just don't get that. It's not the same as, in person. That's really what I wish, particularly with those seniors who are just getting ready to launch and be gone.
Mary Kate, I wish that I could.
Mine is similar to Jonathan's. The now seniors are near and dear to my heart as my first class at Archie's, and I wish that I could see them and hang out with them in campus ministry and give them the senior year that they really, really deserve and worked so hard for over the last 5 years.
Denise.
I wish that I could hold up a mirror to every student, teacher, and staff member so they could see how phenomenal and how resilient they all are during this last 12 months. So I would just want everybody to understand how amazing they are, and despite what they're carrying and what they're going through, just for them to see their worth and their resilience during this time.
Jackie.
This question was a little difficult for me because there's just so much that I wish I could do during this time. But one thing that I really wish I could do was end all of these precautions, make sure everybody has the vaccine, and I get to be the one to announce to my students, take off your masks, get rid of the dividers, and give them candy and juice boxes, and just chat with them for an entire class period. Ask them how life's going. It's over. I wish I got to be that person.
I don't even know what to say after that one. That's now, juice boxes have now become my. Actually, I've been thinking about this, and it became very clear to me. We had one of our most successful boys basketball teams we've had in really almost in years at school. And what I wish that I could have done was them having one, for all of our teams, but one game in which every single person in the school would have been in the gym, screaming really loudly, supporting each other, cheering. I wish, one school assembly where we do nothing but make noise. 650 students at the top of our lungs saying, "Let's go, Bishops, amen," everything where we're um, just sort of let it all out and do it together and do it this year before people scatter to the winds over the summer. I hope you found that as powerful to watch as it was for us to participate in. Uh, when we finished that circle with my staff, and they're just all terrific, uh, the most common reaction was, "That was so cathartic. I appreciated the invitation. I didn't know that I needed that." And it was and then one person asked if we could do that with our entire faculty at our next professional development, which I'm actually in the process right now of setting up. It's next week. Uh, and you're struck by how different that staff interaction was with the way we usually interact with our staff. We were gathering them for something like a faculty meeting. The traditional top-down, and I'm as guilty of it as any other school administrator is, being up there with a packed agenda. Okay, we're doing this, we're doing that, and meanwhile somebody's in the corner marking papers. Because it's top down, no one really feels like they can speak up, or it's not meant to be a dialogue. And if someone does speak up, it's usually those one or two sort of most vocal faculty members who may or may not be representing um, all the viewpoints that are in the room. We know that as a community, we represent diverse viewpoints and perspectives, and very often when we gather, those aren't expressed. A circle, by design, by eliminating the hierarchy, by having attention to detail and deliberation, removes a lot of those barriers, gives voice to everyone in the room, and much like it did to our staff members, leaves you feeling refreshed. That camaraderie that is so important to foster in our common mission. So to give you a couple of other ideas and examples that we did for a circle, I want to talk about two different applications that I had an opportunity to participate in. The first one that I want to talk about is a summer book study that we did with the Roach Center at Boston College. In the aftermath of George Floyd, in that summer of just real racial unrest, we were all wrestling with how are we doing serving all of the members of our community, especially our members of color, and doing some reflection. So the Roach Center invited us to a book study, Racial Justice in the Catholic Church, by Father Brian Massengale, who is a person of color and a Jesuit priest. And it was a powerful text in which Father Massengale on occasion is critical of the church and some of our own history. So in doing so, the BC was able to use circles to create immediate communities of educators and representatives from different parishes, different school communities, often coming from different positions with different group members. And what we needed to do with the circle was to create a space where we could be open and honest, because in order for this book study to be effective, we had to share our common experiences. And so the circle, with its open-ended prompts, by eliminating the hierarchy where we didn't have experts, just participants and facilitators, and I was a facilitator, provided that vehicle for us. And so if you just look at some of the prompts and what we were able to accomplish in just 4 weeks, you could see that even in week 2, we were still building community. We were beginning with a check-in. How are you doing? And then the first couple of questions really were just things that you did not need to read the book to do. Describe a place and time outside your family when you felt community. Describe a place when you felt the absence of community. And we were just dipping our toes into getting people to share parts of the book that resonated with them. Share a detail. Did anything sound familiar? What do you wish in chapter 2 you could take back? Now jump to week 4, where we don't have the same type of, we'd have a quick check-in, but immediately we are getting into some of the heavier themes that Father Mascale are really laying out at the end of the book. How do we use the welcome table to describe justice? How do we make our communities more just? What are we thinking of when thinking of our own students and colleagues of color? We really need that trust and vulnerability to be able to open up, because we all know that in our communities, and certainly Archbishop Williams is no exception, we all have failed to serve all members of our community equitably. And then looking at a reflection on Catholic is universal, sort of this final sort of uplift. So from 2 to 4, we were able to really use the book and use the circle to walk away, to build a community. And I can tell you from my own experience, members of my circle I have turned to during this upcoming school year for help and guidance as issues have arisen, as we all need that community as school leaders and educators. So that was a summer experience. More recently, I helped use circles as an application to the Capitol riots on January 6th. I'm sure if you were like me and like all of us, we were all struck by these images. Most of us, we were in a remote learning period briefly, so we were at home, we were seeing these images, and in addition to being the principal of the school, I'm also the AP economics teacher at my school. So I was in an email chat with my social studies teachers just saying, how are we going to deal with this? And I was especially wrestling with it because I had my students' first block the next day. And so I used the circle and I put some rounds together as a way to kind of give everybody that space, because I knew that every student in the room had to have been struck by it in some which way, shape, or form. And we know that so many of our students just aren't willing to vocalize that. They don't, no matter how many efforts we make to create a place where everyone feels comfortable, that's not everybody. So the structure of the circle, its deliberateness, knowing that you are going to have a time to speak and there's not going to be crosstalk, and we all have the students that are expert at crosstalk, created a space for some remarkable responses. Typical teenager, this is just ridiculous. Why weren't there more police? But with a sincerity because of the moment. And then something that really struck all of us, one of my international students who's not apt to speak often in the class, said, this reminds me of the Hong Kong demonstrations from a year ago. And now all of a sudden, a discussion of what was going on in the United States had taken on a character of what's also going on in China and Hong Kong. In similar fashion, we used the circle, a basic template of it, to have a broader faculty discussion with members of some of my humanities teachers. And again, it started with some things about just some basic vulnerability. I don't know how to approach this. Some struggling, how do we take a firmer stance on this? Another, how can we possibly be neutral here? Knowing that as a Catholic school community, we're required to be politically neutral, but never morally neutral. And that gets harder to explicate every single year. And then something, what are we doing for inauguration? So it opened up the door to really recognize the fact that none of us are experts on something like this. So having a format in which we could turn to each other, strengthen each other, build bonds of community and trust, allowed us all to process and deal with this powerfully emotional day. So that's a little bit of what I used to give you some other ideas on ways in which you could use circles. Building community norms, anything that you're looking for community building, social-emotional learning, other important but difficult conversations. You know, we mentioned race, trauma, but I would also suggest to you grief. I've Also, unfortunately, been a school leader that has had to deal with grief in my tenure here. And one of the most expert advice I've received is students especially don't want to talk to an outsider when they're wrestling with grief. They want to talk to somebody they trust. Who do they trust more? Oftentimes it's each other and their teachers. So having a format where it might not be routine, it might not be business as normal, but routine as normal because I'm in my community and with whom I trust often allows people to process and deal with grief when it can strike community. Uh, Denny's talked a bit about how circles came to schools through restorative discipline. It's tremendously powerful there. Again, working as a staff, and I'm still wrestling with how can I engage the community and my parents and maybe use this to build and extend these bonds of trust wider out. So lastly, just some tips on using circles. The biggest thing I can ask you is trust the process. Make the commitment, structure it deliberately with the right questions, then go deeper and know that you've got to build that trust first. If you're committed to it, if you let especially students know this is what we're going to do and then you follow through on it, I promise you they will warm up to it. Once people recognize that this is a safe space and the facilitator truly is a facilitator, not an observer, not an outside expert, but having a spot in the circle like everybody else, following the speaking order, it allows that process to come to fruition. It may take time. You may have to do more than one, like any pedagogical strategy, but it's something that if you commit it to, it can open up some doors to really make all of our Catholic school communities more mission focused, more focused on the fact that we are serving God by serving our students. So I invite you to use this strategy. There are some resources that you can turn to. And I reiterate Denise's invitation. Please feel free to contact her, contact me. My staff that you saw in the video is also willing to engage. And thank you for watching this webinar and enjoy the rest of this conference.